tonight's sleepy tale, we meet a man whose music tames beasts and hearts alike. But when love finds him in the woods, it sets him on a path far darker than he could ever imagine. Now, sit back, take a deep breath, and enjoy the tale of Orpheus and Eurydice. Down in a small, sun-drenched clearing, Orpheus sat with his back against a sun-warmed boulder, his lyre resting comfortably in the crook of his arm. His eyes were closed, his head tilted slightly as if listening not just to the music he made, but to the silence that held it. His fingers moved with an effortless grace across the gleaming strings, coaxing forth melodies that spoke of sunlight and shadow, of the deep peace of the earth and the fleeting sorrow of the wind. Around him, the clearing held its breath. A pair of normally watchful deer stood utterly still near the edge of the trees, their liquid brown eyes fixed on the musician, fear forgotten. Further back, almost blending with the shadows beneath a dense thicket, a gray wolf lay curled, its powerful body relaxed in an unnatural calm, sharp ears twitching slightly with each rising chord. Even the birds in the branches overhead seemed to have paused their chatter, their silence a form of listening. The very air felt thick with a tranquil magic, a harmony spun from sound that momentarily gentled the wild heart of the Thracian landscape. A twig snapped underfoot just beyond the clearing's edge. Orpheus didn't startle, but his fingers paused momentarily on the strings, letting the last note hang shimmering in the quiet. The spell lingered, but the intrusion, however small, had shifted the atmosphere. The deer lifted their heads, suddenly alert, and the wolf raised its muzzle, a low rumble starting deep in its chest, though it made no move to rise. Slowly, cautiously, a figure emerged from the trees, a shepherd, his face weathered by sun and wind, clutching a sturdy wooden staff. He stopped short at the edge of the clearing, his eyes wide with disbelief as he took in the scene. The musician, the lyre, the unnervingly placid wild animals. He looked from the wolf to the deer, then back to the young man seated calmly amongst them. "Forgive me, stranger," the shepherd stammered, his voice hushed, raspy with awe and perhaps a little fear. He took an involuntary step back. "I heard the music, drifting. I followed it. But this..." He gestured vaguely with a trembling hand towards the wolf, which was now watching him with wary golden eyes. "How?" Orpheus opened his eyes. They were deep and calm, holding no alarm, only a gentle understanding. He offered the shepherd a faint, reassuring smile and touched the lyre strings again, playing a soft, simple chord. The low growl from the wolf subsided instantly, peace, friend," Orpheus said, his voice as melodic as his playing, though quiet. "They mean no harm while the lyre sings. They are only listening, like you." The shepherd swallowed hard, taking another hesitant step forward, his gaze fixed on Orpheus. Listening? A wolf? And the deer? Standing so close? He shook his head slowly. Are you the one they speak of? Down in the village? The musician? Orpheus? They say. He trailed off, unsure how to voice the strange rumors. "I am Orpheus," the young man confirmed simply, his eyes holding the shepherd's gaze steadily. He looked down at his lyre, running a finger along its smooth, dark wood. The music, it seeks harmony. It reaches out. Sometimes, even the wild hearts hear it and pause for a moment, remembering a peace they rarely know. The shepherd, whose name was Lycus, stared, trying to reconcile the ordinary appearance of the young man, clad in simple tunic, his dark hair ruffled by the breeze, with the extraordinary power emanating from him and his instrument. "Harmony," Lycus repeated slowly, testing the word. "It sounds like more than harmony to me. It sounds like enchantment." Orpheus looked up again, a hint of sadness touching his expression. "It is not command, shepherd. I do not bind them against their will. It is an invitation. A reminder, perhaps, of a connection we have all forgotten. The world has its own music, deep and ancient. I only try to listen. And sometimes," he added, a ghost of a smile returning, "I try to play along." He played another soft chord, and the deer lowered their heads again, resuming their posture of calm attention. Lycus watched them, then looked back at Orpheus, his fear slowly giving way to a profound sense of wonder. He had spent his life amongst these hills, understood the harsh realities of the wild, the constant tension between predator and prey. To see that tension dissolved, replaced by this shared moment of tranquility orchestrated by mere strings and wood, felt like witnessing a miracle. I have never seen anything like it," Lycus murmured, shaking his head again. "It's like the world itself holds its breath for you when you play." Orpheus inclined his head slightly, accepting the shepherd's words without pride. "Perhaps it does," he said softly. "Or perhaps it simply remembers its own true song for a moment." He let a final, gentle cascade of notes fall from the lyre, notes that seemed to shimmer and fade like departing sunlight. As the last vibration ceased, the magic subtly withdrew. The wolf rose slowly, stretched its powerful frame, cast a final, indifferent glance at the shepherd, and melted back into the shadows of the pines. The deer twitched their ears, looked around with newly awakened caution, and then turned, bounding gracefully away into the deeper woods. The birds overhead began to chirp and flutter once more. The clearing returned to its normal state, yet the memory of the shared peace lingered palpably in the air. Lycus watched the animals depart, his expression a mixture of amazement and something akin to reverence. He turned back to Orpheus, who was now carefully wrapping his lyre in a soft cloth. Will you play again soon?" Lycus asked, the question hesitant, hopeful. Orpheus secured the cloth around his instrument and rose smoothly to his feet. "The music comes when it will, shepherd," he replied gently. "When the heart feels the need to speak, or when the world calls for a moment of quiet." He gave Lycus a simple nod of farewell. "Go well." And with that, he turned and began walking back down the path he had ascended earlier, his figure moving with a quiet grace through the slanting afternoon light. Lycus stood alone in the clearing, the shepherd's staff grounding him, his mind reeling from what he had witnessed. He listened until the sound of Orpheus's footsteps faded completely, leaving only the familiar sounds of the forest. He looked around the empty clearing, half expecting to find some physical trace of the magic, but there was only the scent of pine needles and warm earth. He shook his head one last time, a profound sense of mystery settling over him, and turned to gather his own scattered flock, his thoughts filled with the musician who spoke the language of harmony to the wild heart of Thrace. Days turned into weeks, and the Thracian spring deepened into early summer. The sun lingered longer in the sky, warming the earth, coaxing forth new layers of green and bursts of vibrant floral color. Orpheus continued his wanderings, his lyre, his constant companion, seeking out the quiet places where the world's music felt clearest. He often found himself drawn back towards the higher slopes, towards the memory of the peaceful clearing and the shepherd Lycus's awestruck face. One particularly warm afternoon, guided by the lazy drone of bees and the sweet scent of wild thyme, he followed a less trodden path that branched off near where he'd met Lycus. It wound through a stand of whispering birch trees, their leaves shimmering like silver coins in the dappled sunlight, before opening unexpectedly into another meadow. This one was smaller, more secluded than the first, cupped like a hidden jewel between gentle grassy hills. Wildflowers grew in abundance, painting the ground in strokes of blue, red, and gold. A profound sense of peace hung in the air, thick and warm as honey. He stepped into the meadow, feeling an immediate sense of rightness, as if the place had been waiting for him. He settled himself beneath a hawthorn bush laden with creamy blossoms, leaned back against its trunk, and drew his lyre onto his lap. For a moment, he just breathed in the atmosphere, the scent of sun-warmed grass and flowers, the drowsy hum of insects. Then, his fingers found the strings, and he began to play. The melody that emerged was soft and reflective, an attempt to capture the meadow's serene beauty, its feeling of being held apart from the world's cares. He played for some time, lost in the sound, eyes half closed against the brightness. Gradually, however, he became aware of a subtle shift, a feeling that his music wasn't just flowing outwards, but was being met, received, perhaps even answered. It wasn't an echo. It was a presence, a listening so profound it seemed to deepen the meadow's own stillness. He let the last note fade and slowly opened his eyes. Standing near a cluster of tall blue larkspurs, bathed in the golden light, was a young woman. She was dressed simply, her dark hair caught back loosely, revealing a face of gentle beauty and quiet contemplation. She wasn't looking directly at him, but rather at the flowers nearby. Her head tilted slightly, a soft, almost wondering smile on her lips, as if she too were listening to some unheard melody. She seemed as much a part of the meadow as the flowers themselves, radiating a warmth and serenity that perfectly matched the place. Orpheus watched her for a silent moment, captivated. He felt no urge to startle her, only a quiet curiosity. He waited until she slowly turned her gaze towards him. Her eyes, the color of warm earth after rain, held no fear, only a calm recognition, as if his presence wasn't entirely unexpected. "Your music?" she said, her voice soft yet clear as a bell, carrying easily across the small distance between them. "It sounds like the meadow feels, like sunlight warming the petals." Orpheus felt a strange sense of connection, as if she had voiced something he himself had only felt. He rose slowly to his feet, holding his lyre carefully. "Forgive me," he said. "I didn't realize anyone else knew of this place. Does my playing disturb your peace?" She shook her head, a gentle smile touching her lips again. "No," she replied, taking a step closer. "It deepens it. It speaks a language I thought only the wildflowers understood. A language of belonging." She paused, her gaze curious and direct. "Who are you?" to understand them so well. "I am Orpheus," he answered simply. "And I don't know if I understand truly. I only try to listen." He gestured towards the lyre. "This helps me hear." She came closer still, moving with an unhurried grace, stopping just a few paces away. "My name is Eurydice," she said. "I come here often. It's quiet, a place to feel the world breathe." She looked at him thoughtfully. "You hear it too, don't you? The breathing?" He nodded, surprised and pleased by her words. "Yes, sometimes loudly, like the wind in the pines. Sometimes softly, like the grass growing." He hesitated, then asked, emboldened by her understanding gaze, "And you? How do you hear it?" Eurydice looked around the meadow, a soft light in her eyes. "I hear it in the way the bees move from flower to flower, so certain of their purpose. In the silence, just before dusk." She looked back at him. "Your music, it gathers all those feelings together. It gives them a voice." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the hum of the bees and the distant call of a bird. It wasn't awkward, but rather felt like a shared space, a moment of mutual recognition. "I have never met anyone," Orpheus began slowly, "who speaks of these things. Most people—" He trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Most people are busy," Eurydice finished for him gently. "Their ears are filled with other sounds, worries, plans. It's easy to forget to listen to the quieter voices." She smiled again, a warmth that reached her eyes. "But you haven't forgotten." He felt a lightness spread through him, a sense of being seen, understood, in a way he hadn't realized he'd been missing. He lifted his lyre slightly. "May I play again?" he asked. "Or would you prefer the meadow's own silence?" "Please," she said, settling herself gracefully on the grass near the larkspurs. "Play. Let your music speak with the silence." And so, Orpheus played. But this time, his music was different. It was still inspired by the meadow, by the sun and the flowers. But now, it held something more. A sense of companionship, of shared wonder. He played melodies that spoke of gentle discovery, of the quiet joy of finding a kindred spirit in an unexpected place. He glanced at Eurydice as he played. She sat listening, her eyes sometimes closed, sometimes gazing thoughtfully at the swaying grasses, a serene contentment on her face. When he finally finished, letting the last notes dissolve into the warm air, she looked at him, her eyes shining. "Thank you, Orpheus," she said softly. "That was beautiful, like hearing my own heart's quietest thoughts sung aloud." He simply nodded, his own heart too full for words at that moment. He knew, with a certainty that resonated deeper than any music he had ever played, that this meeting was significant, the beginning of a new harmony in the song of his life. He had found someone who didn't just hear his music, but understood the silence from which it sprang. From that day forward, the hidden meadow became their sanctuary. Orpheus found his steps leading him there again and again, not just drawn by the peace of the place itself, but by the quiet anticipation of finding Eurydice there. And often she was, sitting among the wild flowers, or walking slowly by the whispering birch trees, her presence adding a gentle radiance to the sunlit space. Their connection deepened with each meeting, flowing as naturally and inevitably as a river finding its course to the sea. They talked for hours, sharing thoughts and observations they had rarely voiced to others. Orpheus spoke of the subtle language of his music, how different chords seemed to echo the colors of the sky, how certain rhythms matched the beating of a frightened bird's wings. Eurydice shared her own quiet wisdom, gleaned from watching the cycles of nature, the patience of seeds waiting beneath the soil, the resilience of flowers bending in the wind, the silent teachings of the stars. "Tell me again about the stars, Orpheus," she asked one evening, as they sat together watching the first pinpricks of light appear in the deepening twilight sky. The air was cool now, scented with damp earth and night-blooming flowers. "Do they truly sing, as you believe?" Orpheus gazed upwards, his lyre resting silently beside him. "I believe they do, my love," he answered softly, the term of endearment feeling as natural on his lips as breathing. A music vast and slow, woven from light and distance and time itself. It's too immense for mortal ears to grasp fully. But sometimes, when the night is utterly still and the heart is open, I think I can hear a whisper of it, a deep, resonant hum, like the universe breathing. Eurydice leaned her head against his shoulder, looking up at the countless stars beginning to blaze against the darkening velvet. "I think I feel it, more than hear it," she murmured. "A sense of order, of peace. Like everything, even the smallest firefly blinking down there in the grass has its place in the great pattern." "Exactly," Orpheus said, a thrill passing through him at her words. That's what the music is. Pattern, harmony, connection. He reached for his lyre, his fingers finding the strings in the dim light. He began to play a soft, searching melody, full of quiet wonder and yearning, like a reflection of the star-filled sky above. Eurydice listened, her eyes closed now, a peaceful expression on her face. "Your music," she whispered when he paused. "It makes me feel that connection. It reminds me that we are part of something much larger than ourselves." Their love grew like a strong, healthy vine, twining around their days, enriching everything it touched. Orpheus found his music changing, blossoming. The melancholy undertones that had always lingered beneath even his brightest melodies began to soften, balanced now by a deep current of joy and contentment he had never known before. He composed songs specifically for Eurydice, melodies filled with the warmth of her smile, the gentleness of her touch, the quiet wisdom in her eyes. They built a life together, simple and deeply fulfilling. They walked through sunlit forests, their hands intertwined, pointing out the shy woodland creatures or the patterns of lichen on ancient stones. They shared quiet meals under the shade of olive trees, talking softly or simply enjoying the comfortable silence between them. Eurydice's presence became Orpheus's anchor, the calm center around which the music of his world revolved. He still played for the creatures of the wild, charming them into moments of unnatural peace. But now, Eurydice sat beside him, a quiet, appreciative audience, her presence lending a deeper warmth to the scene. The wolves and deer seemed to accept her as readily as they accepted Orpheus, sensing the same gentle spirit, the same connection to the natural world. They existed in a state of gentle harmony, two souls perfectly attuned. It felt idyllic, timeless, as if their happiness were as enduring as the mountains themselves. A song destined to play on forever. The day chosen for their wedding dawned bright and clear. It was one of those perfect summer days in Thrace, when the sky was an endless vault of brilliant blue, and the air hummed with the drowsy contentment of high summer. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves, carrying the scent of sun-baked earth and distant wildflowers. Friends gathered from the nearby village and the surrounding hillsides, their faces beaming with affection for the beloved couple. The ceremony itself was simple, held not in a stuffy hall, but outdoors, in a wide, ancient grove of olive trees whose silvery leaves shimmered in the sunlight. Orpheus, his usual quiet demeanor softened by an undeniable radiance of joy, stood waiting, his lyre temporarily set aside. Eurydice approached, walking through the dappled sunlight, her simple white gown seeming to glow, a wreath of wild flowers crowning her dark hair. Her eyes met Orpheus's, and a shared look of profound happiness passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the love that had brought them to this moment. Words were spoken, blessings offered, simple vows exchanged beneath the benevolent gaze of the old trees. Laughter mingled with the gentle strumming Orpheus eventually coaxed from his lyre, music overflowing with the bliss of the occasion. Wine was poured, sweet cakes shared, and toasts were made to their future. May your lives together be as harmonious as Orpheus's lyre, declared Lycus the shepherd, who had become a fond friend, raising his cup high. A cheer went up from the small crowd. Eurydice smiled, her hand resting lightly on Orpheus's arm, her happiness a tangible warmth. The afternoon wore on in a haze of gentle celebration, filled with conversation, music, and the easy companionship of shared joy. The sun began its slow descent towards the western hills, painting the sky in softer hues of gold and rose. Feeling the need for a moment of quiet amidst the gentle bustle, Eurydice slipped away from the main gathering, wandering towards the edge of the grove where it sloped down towards a nearby riverbank. The grass grew thick and lush there, studded with late-blooming wildflowers seeking the moisture from the stream. Orpheus, noticing her quiet departure, smiled fondly. He knew her need for moments of peaceful reflection, even amidst celebration. He started to follow, but was caught up in conversation with an elderly couple wishing them well. "Where are you wandering, my love?" he called out lightly across the distance, his voice filled with affection. Eurydice turned back briefly, gesturing towards a vibrant patch of deep purple irises growing near the water's edge. "Just look at these flowers. Orpheus," she called back, her voice bright with delight. "Like velvet in the sunlight. I just want to look closer. I'll be right back." She turned and took a few steps further into the tall grass, drawn by the beauty of the irises, wanting to see the intricate patterns on their petals up close. The air near the river was cooler, carrying the damp scent of mud and reeds. She bent down slightly, reaching out a hand to gently touch a silken petal. It happened in an instant, swift and silent as a shadow, hidden within the dense grass. Disturbed by her approach, a viper struck. A tiny pinprick of pain on her ankle, sharp and sudden, followed by a strange, spreading coldness. She gasped, stumbling back, her hand flying to the spot. She saw the snake slither away, a fleeting dark shape disappearing into the green depths. A wave of dizziness washed over her. The vibrant colors of the meadow seemed to dim, the sounds of the celebration fading as if behind a thick veil. She tried to call out Orpheus's name, but only a faint sigh escaped her lips. Her legs felt heavy, unresponsive. The coldness was creeping upwards now, a terrifying numbness stealing the warmth from her limbs. Orpheus, finally free from his conversation, looked towards the riverbank, frowning slightly when he didn't immediately see Eurydice. A prickle of unease touched him. "Eurydice," he called, louder this time. He saw her then, crumpled near the patch of irises, her white dress stark against the green grass. His heart lurched with a sudden, sickening fear. He ran, his feet stumbling over the uneven ground. "Eurydice, speak to me. What's happened?" he cried, kneeling beside her, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch, afraid of what he would find. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with difficulty. They were clouded with pain and a confusion that tore at his soul. Her skin felt alarmingly cool beneath his frantic touch. "Orpheus," she whispered, her voice faint, breathless, cold, so sudden. "Snake." His blood ran cold. He saw the 2 tiny puncture marks on her ankle, already darkening. Panic clawed at him, sharp and suffocating. "No," he choked out, shaking his head in disbelief. He gathered her into his arms, holding her close, as if his warmth could fight the chilling venom spreading through her veins. "No, stay with me. Eurydice, please, don't leave me." She tried to lift a hand to his face, but her strength failed her. A faint, heartbreakingly gentle smile touched her lips. "Always, Orpheus," she breathed, her voice barely audible. And then her eyes drifted closed. The faint rise and fall of her chest stilled. The warmth, the vibrant life that had defined her, seeped away, leaving behind a devastating, absolute stillness. Orpheus stared down at her peaceful face, her name a raw, soundless cry trapped in his throat. The joyous sounds of the wedding feast, just yards away, seemed to belong to another world, another lifetime. Here, in the tall grass by the river, under the soft evening sky, the sun had abruptly fallen, plunging his world into a silent darkness. The music had stopped. The moments immediately following Eurydice's last breath were a blur of numb disbelief for Orpheus. The sounds of the wedding celebration finally faltered, replaced by confused murmurs, Then shocked cries as people realized what had happened at the riverbank. Hands reached out to help. Voices offered frantic, useless suggestions, but Orpheus barely registered them. He remained kneeling in the grass, cradling Eurydice's lifeless form, his gaze fixed on her still face, unable to comprehend the sudden, brutal finality of her absence. Gently, inevitably, friends drew him away, lifting Eurydice's body with sorrowful reverence. They led him back towards the village, stumbling like a man walking in his sleep. His world narrowed to the agonizing emptiness in his arms, where she should have been. The lyre, left forgotten in the olive grove, lay silent, its usually vibrant strings seeming dull and lifeless in the fading light. The days that followed were shrouded in a grief so profound it seemed to seep into the very fabric of the world around him. The sun still rose, the birds still sang, the river still flowed, but to Orpheus, it was all muted, distorted, robbed of its meaning and beauty. He moved through the necessary rituals of mourning like a phantom, his eyes hollow, his face a mask of silent despair. His mother, Calliope, came to him, her own face etched with sorrow, not just for Eurydice, but for the shattering grief she saw consuming her son. She tried to reach him, placing food before him, speaking words of comfort, urging him towards the stream of life that still flowed. Orpheus, child, she pleaded softly one evening, finding him sitting alone in the darkened corner of their home, staring blankly at the wall. You must eat. You must try to find a way back to the living. Eurydice, she would not want you lost to this darkness. He turned his head slowly, his eyes focusing on her face, as if from a great distance. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of his old self, but then his gaze slid away, back into the depths of his sorrow. Live, he whispered, his voice rough from disuse, broken. How, mother? How can I live when the other half of my soul is gone? He gestured vaguely towards his lyre, which lay untouched in the corner. The music. It only knows her name now. It weeps. It cannot sing of life anymore. He fell silent again, withdrawing into the impenetrable fortress of his grief. Calliope watched him, her heart aching with helplessness. When Orpheus finally reached for his lyre again, it was not in search of solace, but as the only way left to voice the feelings that consumed him. He carried it out into the wilderness, away from the pitying eyes of the villagers. He found a place high on a barren, windswept ridge, overlooking the valleys where he and Eurydice had walked and dreamed. And there, he played. The music that flowed from the strings was unlike anything anyone had ever heard before. The melodies twisted and wept, soared with anguish, and plunged into depths of despair that echoed the darkness in his own soul. Nature itself seemed to respond to his sorrow. Flowers in the nearby meadows reportedly bowed their heads, their vibrant petals seeming to fade and wilt as the mournful notes washed over them. Streams that usually chattered cheerfully over stones seemed to slow, their currents becoming sluggish, their sound deepening into a somber murmur. Ancient trees shed their leaves out of season, their branches reaching towards the sky like arms pleading for solace. Even the rocks themselves, worn smooth by millennia of wind and rain, seemed to absorb the sorrow, their surfaces feeling colder, harder, under the touch. Orpheus played on, oblivious to the passage of time, unaware of the world weeping around him. His music was his only companion, the only entity capable of understanding the vastness of his loss. He poured all his love, all his despair into the lyre, echoing through the Thracian hills. Time lost its usual shape for Orpheus. Days bled into nights, marked only by the shifting light across the landscape and the endless, aching emptiness in his soul. He ate little, slept less, haunted by dreams of Eurydice's smile, the warmth of her hand, the sound of her voice. The world held no color, no joy, only shades of gray reflecting the landscape of his heart. He spent much of his time by the riverbank where Eurydice had fallen, near the patch of irises that still bloomed with a beauty that felt like mockery. The music of grief had exhausted itself, leaving behind a hollow quietude that was almost worse. One twilight, as the sky bled into deep purples and the first stars began to prick the darkness, a new feeling began to stir within the numbness. It wasn't hope, not yet, but a flicker of something else. Refusal. A quiet rebellion against the finality of death, against the cold law that had stolen Eurydice from him. He looked down at his hands, then at the lyre lying dormant on the grass. This instrument, gifted by the gods, capable of charming wild beasts and soothing the savage heart. Could its power extend further? Could it challenge something more powerful than the wildness of nature? Could it, perhaps, challenge death itself? He knew it was madness, but he was mad with grief. The underworld, the realm of Hades, was a place from which no mortal returned. Its gates were guarded, its laws absolute. To attempt entry while still living, to seek to reclaim a soul from the grasp of the Lord of the Dead, it was unthinkable. He stood up, pacing the riverbank, the idea churning within him, a terrifying mix of desperation and resolve, he spoke aloud, his voice raspy, directed at the unseen forces that governed life and death, and perhaps at Eurydice's distant spirit. "They say death is final," he murmured, his voice trembling slightly with the intensity of his thought. "They say the gates of the underworld are barred forever to the living, that the shades forget the sun, forget love, forget all they held dear." He stopped, clenching his fists. "But did they ever love as we loved, my dear Eurydice?" He looked across the river, towards the dark hills that rose against the twilight sky, imagining the hidden paths that might lead down into the earth, into the realm of eternal night. The fear was immense, a cold dread that threatened to extinguish the tiny spark of resolve. But the thought of living out his remaining years in this colorless, soundless world without her was a prospect even more terrifying. "No," he whispered, the word gaining strength as he repeated it. "I cannot accept this silence. I cannot live in a world where your laughter doesn't echo." He turned and strode back to where his lyre lay. He picked it up, the familiar weight feeling different now. Not just an instrument of song, but a weapon which could overcome the heartlessness of the underworld. He ran his fingers over the strings, not playing, but feeling their latent power. He looked towards the invisible barrier between the living and the dead. His jaw set, his eyes, though still shadowed by grief, now holding a glint of fierce determination. It was a resolve born not of anger or defiance against the gods, but purely from the unbearable depth of his love and loss. It was the only path left that wasn't utter despair. "I will go down," he declared, his voice ringing with newfound purpose in the quiet twilight, startling a nightjar into flight. "I will find the hidden way. I will face the darkness, the guardians, the Lord of the dead himself." He held the lyre aloft for a moment, as if making a vow. "And I will bring you back, Eurydice. My music will demand it. Love will demand it." The decision, once voiced, settled within him, solid and irrevocable. The path ahead was fraught with unimaginable peril, the chances of success worrying. Yet, for the first time since Eurydice's death, a sense of purpose, however desperate, cut through the fog of his grief. He would descend into the endless night, armed only with his lyre and the memory of a love that refused to be extinguished. He would attempt the impossible. Orpheus began his search for the passage into the underworld. Legends whispered of hidden entrances. deep caves shrouded in mist, fissures in the earth where the air felt unnaturally cold, forgotten tunnels beneath ancient ruins. He traveled far from the familiar paths of Thrace, guided by rumor and myth. Days blurred into a journey through landscapes that grew increasingly desolate, mirroring the bleakness that still resided within him. Finally, in a remote, shadowed valley where sunlight rarely touched the ground and the rocks seemed to weep perpetually with chill moisture, he found it. A gaping cave mouth, darker than any natural shadow, exhaled a palpable coldness that carried the scent of stagnant water and something else, an ancient, unsettling stillness. No birds sang nearby, no insects hummed. Even the wind seemed to skirt the entrance, reluctant to venture within. This, he knew instinctively, was a threshold between worlds. He stood before the darkness for a long moment, the lyre clutched tightly in his hand. The sheer finality of the step he was about to take washed over him, leaving the world of sunlight, warmth, and memory for the unknown, silent depths. He thought of Eurydice, her smile, the way her hand felt in his, and the image solidified his courage. Taking a deep breath of the cold, heavy air, he stepped across the threshold and into the enveloping blackness. The transition was immediate and profound. The familiar sounds of the living world vanished instantly, replaced by a silence so deep it felt like a physical pressure against his ears. The air grew colder, heavier, making each breath feel like an effort. Light faded rapidly behind him, the cave mouth shrinking to a distant, irrelevant star before disappearing entirely, plunging him into absolute darkness. He moved forward cautiously, one hand trailing against the cold, damp rock wall for guidance, the lyre held protectively in the other. The ground sloped steadily downwards, the path uneven, littered with loose stones that shifted silently beneath his feet. There was no echo here. Sound seemed to be swallowed by the oppressive emptiness. As he descended deeper, the silence began to subtly change. It was no longer absolute, but filled with faint, indeterminate whispers, like the sighing of wind through unseen reeds, or the distant murmur of voices speaking in a language he couldn't comprehend. Were they the sighs of the earth itself, or the rustling passage of shades? He couldn't tell. The darkness, too, was weird. It seemed to shift, forming fleeting shapes in the periphery of his vision, shapes that dissolved whenever he tried to focus on them. It felt less like walking and more like drowning, sinking away from everything known and cherished. The memories of sunlight, birdsong, Eurydice's laughter, they felt fragile, distant, threatened by the encroaching oblivion of this place. He found himself whispering her name, partly as a plea, partly as an anchor to cling to in the disorienting void. Eurydice, he murmured into the dark, his voice sounding unnervingly loud yet small in the vast emptiness. Wait for me. I am coming. Hold fast to the memory of the sun. He spoke to bolster his own courage, to remind himself of his purpose. The journey felt endless, the downward slope relentless. Time ceased to have meaning. There was only the next step into the consuming darkness, the chill seeping deeper into his bones, the oppressive silence pressing in. This darkness is but a passage, he whispered, trying to convince himself, forcing his steps onward. A shadow to walk through. The light is ahead. She is ahead. He clung to the lyre as if it were a living thing, its smooth wood a tangible link to the world above, its silent strings holding the promise of the music that was his only hope. Could its sound even penetrate this profound stillness? Would the guardians of this realm listen? The doubts gnawed at him, fueled by the eerie atmosphere. Can you hear my lyre, even here? He breathed, touching the strings lightly, though he dared not play yet. Does its echo reach you, my love? After what felt like an eternity of descent, the air began to change subtly again. The damp chill lessened slightly, replaced by a drier, dustier cold. The faint, whispering sounds grew slightly more distinct, coalescing into a low, continuous murmur, like the sound of a vast, unseen river or the collective sigh of countless souls. And ahead, in the impenetrable darkness, a faint, flickering luminescence began to appear, not light as he knew it, but a pale, grayish glimmer that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. He knew, with a certainty that sent a shiver down his spine despite the rising hope, that he was approaching the next stage of his journey. He was nearing the edge of the underworld proper, the domain of Hades, the land of the dead. The true trials were about to begin. He gripped his lyre tighter, took another deep breath of the strange, lifeless air, and walked towards the distant, mournful glimmer. The pale, flickering light gave way to a vast, sluggish river. Its waters were black and oily, flowing without discernible current beneath a sky that was not sky, but an endless expanse of oppressive, starless gloom. This was the river Styx, the boundary separating the living from the dead. The air hung thick with the scent of decay and stagnant water, and the low, continuous murmur Orpheus had heard was the sound of countless shades gathered on the near bank, waiting. They were ephemeral figures, translucent and gray, their forms indistinct, their faces etched with a weary longing and patient despair. They crowded the muddy shore, stretching as far as Orpheus could see in the dim luminescence. They reached out their hands towards the river, towards the lone figure poling an ancient boat across the black water. Charon, the ferryman of the dead. He was immensely old, his form gaunt and stooped, clad in filthy rags. His eyes held no emotion, only a deep tiredness born of millennia spent performing his grim task. He pushed the boat along with slow, deliberate movements of a wooden pole, ignoring the pleading gestures of the shades on the bank. His gaze was fixed forward, towards the endless cycle of ferrying souls across the Styx, one boatload at a time. Orpheus watched him approach, his heart sinking. Legends said Charon demanded payment, a coin placed in the mouth of the dead before allowing passage. Orpheus, a living soul, had no such coin, only his lyre and the desperate plea in his heart. As the skiff grated against the muddy bank, Charon looked up, his gaze sweeping impassively over the teeming crowd of shades. Then his eyes snagged on Orpheus. They narrowed slightly, the first flicker of anything resembling interest Orpheus had seen in that ancient face. Charon's gaze traveled over Orpheus's solid form, the vibrant, living presence so alien in this realm of shadows, and lingered on the lyre held firmly in his hand. Orpheus stepped forward, pushing gently through the crowd of whispering shades who seemed to part before his living warmth. He stopped at the water's edge, meeting the ferryman's weary, assessing gaze. "Ferryman," Orpheus called out, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the murmuring sighs of the dead. "I seek passage across your river." Charon's voice, when it came, was like the grating of stones, rough and cold. "The living have no place here. My toll is absolute. Only the dead may cross." He gestured with a bony hand towards the shades. "You are not one of them." "I am not," Orpheus acknowledged. "I come not as one seeking rest, but as one driven by a love that refuses the silence of your realm. My coin is not the cold metal of the dead, ferryman, but sound." He lifted the lyre, positioning it against his shoulder. "Let my music plead my case. Let it speak of the love that defies even your dark river. Let it remind you, perhaps, of the world you ferry souls away from." Charon watched him, motionless, his expression unreadable. Skepticism warred with a flicker of ancient curiosity in those dead eyes. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a silent assent to hear this strange currency. Orpheus took a breath. closed his eyes for a moment to summon the image of Eurydice and began to play. He poured into the music all his longing, his desperate hope, the memory of sunlight on Eurydice's hair, the unbearable pain of her loss. The melody rose, poignant and beautiful, cutting through the oppressive gloom like a shaft of unexpected light. It spoke of life, of love, of beauty snatched away too soon. A stillness fell over the bank of that dark river. The shades ceased their sighing, their faces turning towards the source of the sound. A flicker of forgotten emotion stirring in their vacant eyes. Even the black waters of the river seemed to pause their sluggish flow, the surface smoothing as if listening. Charon stood frozen, leaning on his pole, his head tilted slightly. The music washed over him, notes of warmth and life piercing the chill weariness of millennia. Orpheus played on, weaving a spell of heartbreaking beauty, his plea resonating in every note. When the final chord faded into the heavy silence, a sound like a deep, rusty sigh escaped Charon's lips. He looked at Orpheus, and for the first time, there was something other than indifference in his gaze. Perhaps a grudging respect, or a flicker of memory from a time before he was bound to this eternal task. Never, Charon rasped, his voice slightly less harsh than before. Never has such sound, such life, crossed the Styx. He hesitated, then gestured curtly towards the boat with his pole. Board. Quickly, before the silence remembers itself, a wave of relief washed over Orpheus, so potent it almost buckled his knees. He stepped carefully into the unsteady boat, the shades on the bank watching him with wide, uncomprehending eyes as Charon pushed off from the shore. The crossing was unnervingly silent, the boat gliding smoothly over the black, still water. Orpheus sat clutching his lyre, his gaze fixed on the far bank looming out of the gray mist, his heart pounding with the first small victory on his impossible journey. The silent ferryman had been moved. The power of his music held even here, at the edge of oblivion. The boat grated onto the far bank of the Styx, a shore as bleak and unwelcoming as the one they had left. Orpheus stepped out onto damp, clinging mud, offering a silent nod of gratitude to Charon, who merely grunted and turned the boat back towards the waiting shades. Orpheus stood alone for a moment, adjusting his eyes to the twilight of the underworld. The air here felt different, drier, dustier, filled with a sense of vast, echoing emptiness. Before him, a path wound vaguely upwards, disappearing into the gloom. He knew from the tales what guardian awaited him next. He tightened his grip on his lyre and started forward, his footsteps making unnervingly loud sounds in the profound silence. He hadn't walked far before he heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath his feet. It grew louder, multiplying, echoing from the unseen rocks ahead. Then, emerging from the swirling mists, came the beast of legend, Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades, guardian of the gates to the land of the dead. He was monstrous, larger than any wolf or bear of the upper world. Each of his three heads snarled and snapped, rows of vicious teeth bared, saliva dripping onto the dark earth. Eyes, 6 pairs of them, glowed with a malevolent red light, fixed intently on the approaching mortal. A mane of writhing snakes hissed around his thick necks, and his thunderous growls promised a swift and brutal end to any unauthorized passage. He was the embodiment of terror, the ultimate deterrent, eternally vigilant in his lonely duty at the threshold of Hades' realm. Orpheus stopped, his heart pounding against his ribs. Fear, cold and primal, threatened to paralyze him. The sheer ferocity of the beast was overwhelming. But then he remembered Eurydice, remembered his vow. He could not falter now. He took a steadying breath, raised his lyre, and met the glowing red eyes of the central head. As Cerberus gathered himself for a terrifying lunge, Orpheus began to play. He didn't choose a melody of defiance or challenge, but one of profound calm, of soothing peace. Notes flowed from the lyre, soft and hypnotic. He poured into the music the tranquility of hidden springs, the deep slumber of the earth in winter, the lulling rhythm of waves on a distant shore. The effect was immediate, though gradual. The furious growls began to lessen in intensity, confusion warring with aggression in the monstrous heads. One head stopped snarling, tilting slightly as if trying to understand the unfamiliar sounds. The hissing snakes around his necks grew quieter, their movements slowing. Orpheus continued to play, slowly stepping forward, his gaze never leaving the hound. He began to speak softly, his voice blending with the music, adding another layer to the calming spell. "Easy now, guardian," he murmured, his tone gentle, reassuring. "Easy, great beast. There is no fight here, only music, only peace." Cerberus hesitated, the multiple heads looking from Orpheus to each other, bewildered by the absence of fear, the presence of this strange, soothing sound. The red glow in their eyes seemed to soften slightly. "Let the music carry you," Orpheus crooned, his fingers weaving intricate, lulling patterns on the strings. Let it take you to dreams, just for a little while. Dreams of quiet fields, perhaps, or a warm hearth. Sleep now, guardian. Sleep and forget your post for just a moment. No harm will come while you rest. Slowly, inevitably, the music worked its magic. The tension eased from Cerberus's massive shoulders. The growls subsided completely, replaced by low, rumbling whimpers that sounded less like threats and more like sighs. One by one, the great heads began to droop, the eyelids growing heavy over the fiery eyes. The writhing snakes stilled, coiling sluggishly. With a final deep yawn that shook the ground, Cerberus sank onto his belly. The three heads lowered themselves onto his massive paws, the glowing eyes closing. The great beast, the terror of the underworld's threshold, lay fast asleep, his breathing deep and rhythmic, utterly subdued by the gentle power of Orpheus's lyre and voice. Orpheus stood over the sleeping monster for a moment, his own breath coming in shaky relief. The music faded from the strings, leaving a surreal calm in the air. He looked at the fearsome guardian, now rendered harmless, almost peaceful in its slumber. He felt a strange pang of something akin to pity for the creature, bound to eternal vigilance and fury. Carefully, quietly, he stepped past the sleeping Cerberus, his heart still hammering, but filled with a growing sense of awe at the power flowing through him. Charon had yielded. Cerberus slept. He had passed the outer guardians. Now, only the heart of the underworld remained, the court of Hades and Persephone themselves. He took one last look at the slumbering hound, then turned towards the path leading deeper into the land of shadows, his resolve hardened by his success. The path beyond the sleeping Cerberus led Orpheus deeper into the underworld. He traversed the asphodel meadows, vast gray fields stretching endlessly under the dim, unchanging twilight. Here wandered the shades of ordinary mortals, detached and listless, whispering forgotten memories, their existence a pale echo of the lives they had lost. They turned their vacant eyes towards him as he passed, a flicker of faint curiosity in their expressions at the sight of his living form, before drifting away like smoke on a non-existent breeze. The air was filled with their sighing, a sound like dry leaves rustling, devoid of warmth or sorrow. Orpheus clutched his lyre tighter, the sheer desolation of the place chilling him more deeply than the underworld's cold. He longed for Eurydice, praying she was not lost in such numb oblivion. He pressed onward, guided by an unseen force, until the landscape began to change again. The gray fields gave way to darker, rockier terrain, and ahead loomed vast, imposing structures. Walls and towers built not of stone, but of solidified shadow. This was the entrance to the palace of Hades, Lord of the Dead. Hesitantly, Orpheus passed through gates that seemed to swallow the faint light, entering a colossal hall. The scale was overwhelming, designed to dwarf mortal spirit. Pillars of black basalt soared into unseen heights, and the air was heavy, still, and bitingly cold. At the far end of the immense hall, upon thrones carved from obsidian and ice, sat the rulers of the silent land. Hades was terrifying in his majesty. His face was stern, impassive, marked by the weight of eternity and absolute authority over his dark domain. A crown of jagged black metal rested on his dark hair, and his eyes, although not evil, held the cold, penetrating darkness of the abyss. Beside him sat Persephone, queen of the underworld. She was beautiful, yet her beauty was touched by an ethereal sadness, a perpetual winter lingering in her gaze. A wreath of dark poppies and withered blooms adorned her hair. The silent court of the underworld, spectral attendants and grim judges, lined the hall, their gazes fixed upon the lone living mortal who dared intrude upon their sovereigns. Orpheus felt crushingly small, his living warmth an anomaly in this realm of cold stillness. But the image of Eurydice burned brightly in his mind, fueling his courage. He walked forward, his footsteps echoing unnervingly in the cavernous silence, until he stood before the shadowed thrones. He knelt, bowing his head low. "Lord Hades, mighty king of the unseen," Orpheus began, his voice clear despite the tremor of awe and fear within him. "And noble Queen Persephone, mistress of shadows and reluctant bloom, I come before you not in defiance, nor with arrogance, but as a humble mortal compelled by a love that death itself has failed to extinguish." He paused, gathering his strength. "I beg you, lend your ears not only to my words, but to the plea of my lyre." Hades watched him, his expression unchanging, his silence more intimidating than any roar. Persephone's gaze, however, softened almost imperceptibly. She looked at Orpheus, then perhaps at the memory of flowers under a sunlit sky. Orpheus rose slowly, positioned his lyre, and began to play. This was the culmination of his art, the masterpiece born of love and sorrow. He poured into the music every shred of his being, the joy of his life with Eurydice, the warmth of her laughter, the beauty of the world she had loved, the crushing agony of her loss, the desolation of his grief, and the desperate, unwavering hope that had driven him down into this abyss. The music filled the vast hall, notes of heartbreaking beauty echoing against the pillars of shadow. It spoke directly to the heart, bypassing reason and law. He sang of sunlight on green leaves, of shared whispers under starry skies, of the simple, profound miracle of love, and then of the sudden cold, the fading light, the silence that followed. As he played, a profound stillness settled over the grim court. The stern faces of the judges seemed to soften. The Furies ceased their silent brooding. Even the air itself seemed less heavy, less cold. Orpheus looked towards the thrones. Hades remained impassive, yet Orpheus thought he saw a flicker, a momentary disturbance in the depths of those abyssal eyes. It was Persephone who reacted visibly. A single, crystalline tear traced a path down her pale cheek, shimmering like captured moonlight before dissolving into the gloom. She turned her gaze towards her husband, a silent plea in her eyes. "Husband," she murmured, her voice soft as falling snow, yet carrying clearly in the hall. Such sorrow, such love, the world above. I remember. Hades looked at his queen, then back at Orpheus, who had finished playing, the last note hanging in the air like a suspended tear. The Lord of the Dead spoke, his voice deep, resonant, echoing with the authority of ages. "Mortal," Hades declared, the word rolling like distant thunder. "Your music is potent. It has stirred echoes in depths rarely touched, even here. A rare feat." He paused, the silence stretching taut. "But the laws of this realm are unchangeable. Those who enter my domain remain. She belongs here now." Orpheus felt despair clutch at him, but he refused to yield. "Great King," he implored, finding his voice again. "Laws are mighty, but is love not also a power? A force that binds souls across worlds? I do not ask to cheat death forever, only for a chance to lead her back to the son she loved, to let her finish the life so cruelly shortened. Grant me this, I beg you, by the love you bear your own queen, by the memory of the world she herself was taken from." Another long silence. Hades considered, his dark gaze unreadable. He looked at Persephone's tear-streaked face, Then, at the mortal whose music had momentarily breached the walls of eternal sorrow. Finally, he nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hall. Very well, Hades conceded, his voice heavy with reluctance. A test, then. A condition, absolute and binding. You may lead her shade from my realm. She will follow you back towards the light. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto Orpheus's, burning with cold intensity. But heed this, musician, for there will be no second chance. Turn not your gaze upon her, not even a glance, until both of you stand fully bathed in the sun's light, beyond the borders of my domain. Look back before that moment, even for an instant, and the deal is revoked. She will be returned to me, lost to you forever. His voice dropped to a menacing whisper. Do you understand? I understand. Orpheus breathed, relief and terror warring within him. Relief that his plea was granted, terror at the weight of the condition. Then go, Hades commanded, gesturing dismissively. Take her shade and depart. The path will be shown. Do not fail. Orpheus bowed low once more, his heart hammering against his ribs. He turned, clutching his lyre, and walked away from the shadowed thrones towards a passage that now seemed faintly illuminated at the side of the hall. He had won. He had achieved the impossible. But the true test, the agonizing trial of faith and restraint, was just beginning. A faint, ethereal shape appeared from the shadows near the passage Hades had indicated. He dared not look, but he knew it was Eurydice. Her form was translucent, shimmering slightly, her features recognizable yet muted, like a reflection seen through moving water. She could not speak, could not touch him, but her presence was undeniable, a fragile beacon in the gloom. He wanted nothing more than to look at her, to hold her, to pour out all the words trapped inside him. But Hades's warning echoed, cold and absolute. Turn not your gaze upon her. Look back, and she is lost to you forever. He forced himself to look away, facing the upward path, the lyre clutched tight in his hand. Eurydice, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, hoping she could hear, hoping she understood. Follow me. We are going home, back to the sun. He began the ascent, his steps slow and deliberate. The path was steep, treacherous, winding upwards through the same oppressive darkness he had descended. Behind him, he could sense her presence, a faint coolness in the air, a subtle disturbance in the profound silence. He could almost feel her gaze on his back, but he dared not turn, dared not seek confirmation. The journey back was an agony of suspense, far worse than the descent. Then, the fear had been of the unknown dangers ahead. Now, the fear was of his own weakness, his own desperate longing. The silence from behind him was the most potent torture. He strained his ears, listening for any sound, the whisper of her spectral footsteps, the rustle of her shade against the rocks, even a sigh. But there was nothing, only the maddening, absolute silence of the underworld, broken solely by the sound of his own breathing and the scuff of his sandals on the rocky path. Doubt began to creep in, insidious and chilling. Was she truly there? Had Hades tricked him? Perhaps the shade was too weak, unable to keep pace. Perhaps she was fading already, dissolving back into the gloom just beyond his reach. The silence felt vast, empty, mocking his hope. Hours passed of silent trudging, first through the asphodel meadows, then around the river Styx. Eurydice? He whispered into the darkness ahead, unable to bear the quiet any longer. His voice sounded small, swallowed by the immensity. Are you behind me? Are you close? Silence was his only answer. The oppressive weight of it pressed down on him, feeding his anxiety. He pictured her translucent form stumbling, perhaps reaching out a hand he couldn't see, couldn't grasp. The need to know, to be certain she was safe, that she was truly following him back to life, became an unbearable physical ache. Just a little further, he muttered, more for himself than for Eurydice. We must be nearing the boundary. I can almost feel a change in the air. Indeed, the darkness seemed subtly less absolute now. A very faint, distant glimmer, far ahead, hinted at the threshold of the living world, the promise of sunlight, of escape, intensified his longing, his desperation. He quickened his pace slightly, eagerness warring with the rigid discipline he forced upon himself. But the silence persisted, stretching his nerves taut as a lyre string about to snap. Why couldn't he hear her? Why couldn't he feel her presence more strongly? What if the gods of the underworld were cruel, playing a final devastating game? What if she wasn't there at all? What if she needed his help? My love, he whispered again, his voice cracking. Give me some sign. Just a rustle, anything. Nothing. Only the echo of his own desperate plea in the unyielding dark. They were so close now. The distant glimmer ahead was undeniably the light of the world above, filtering down into the underworld's entrance. He could almost smell the damp earth, the scent of living things. Freedom was just steps away. He could feel the warmth of the upper world calling to him. He reached the very threshold, one foot stepping onto ground that felt subtly different, charged with life. The sunlight, though still indirect, touched his face. In that moment, overwhelmed by love, doubt, and the unbearable tension of the long, silent ascent, his resolve shattered. He spun around. For a heart-stopping instant, he saw her. Eurydice stood just behind him, her hand outstretched, as if about to touch his shoulder. Her form caught halfway between shadow and the encroaching light. She was ethereal, beautiful, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and dawning horror. She looked more solid than she had in Hades's hall, almost real. Orpheus, he heard her gasp, her voice faint but clear, filled with love and sudden, unbearable sorrow. But even as the name left her lips, the magic of Hades's offer unraveled. Her form flickered, losing its fragile solidity. Her colors faded back to gray. She seemed to recoil, pulled back by an invisible force into the deeper shadows she had almost escaped. Her eyes met his one last time, filled not with accusation, but with infinite, heartbreaking sadness and understanding. Eurydice, he cried out, reaching for her, his hand closing on empty air as her form dissolved like mist in the morning sun. Orpheus. The whisper seemed to echo from the depths, soft, sorrowful, final, farewell. And then she was gone, pulled back into the eternal silence of the underworld, lost to him forever because of one moment of unbearable love and doubt. The passage behind him was empty once more, the silence absolute, heavy with the weight of his failure. He stood frozen on the threshold, bathed in the indifferent light of the living world. He stumbled fully out of the cave mouth, collapsing onto the damp earth under the open sky. The sunlight felt alien, harsh against his skin after the perpetual gloom. The sounds of the living world seemed unnaturally loud, almost painful after the profound silence of the underworld. He lay there for a long time, curled against the roots of an ancient tree, the reality of his loss washing over him in waves. He had journeyed into the heart of death, faced its guardians, moved its rulers, only to fail at the final step, undone by his own desperate love. He eventually rose, moving like an old man, his body aching, his spirit utterly broken. He made his way back towards the familiar lands of Thrace, but he was a changed being. The light had gone out of his eyes, replaced by a deep, permanent shadow of sorrow. He avoided the villages, the concerned faces of friends, the questions he couldn't bear to answer. He sought solitude, drawn back to the wild places, the forests and hills where he had once known such joy with Eurydice. One soft evening, sitting by the river as twilight painted the water in shades of fading rose and violet, Orpheus played his lyre. The melody was soft, exquisitely sad, yet peaceful. He looked out over the flowing water, towards the darkening hills, a faint, accepting smile touching his lips. "Do you hear this, my love?" he whispered into the stillness, his voice blending with the final fading notes of the lyre. "This song is for you, always." The river flowed on, carrying the music and the whisper downstream towards the endless sea, under a sky slowly filling with the eternal silent stars. That is the end of tonight's story. I thank you for listening. For those of you still awake, I will continue to play sound effects to prevent auto-played videos waking people up. Good night.